Is a deal with Iran even possible? Yes, and it could be a good deal for the Tehran's regime. The Trump administration wants Iran to dismantle its nuclear program and stop financing Hezbollah and Hamas. This would be a good deal for the theocratic regime in Tehran, which aims to relieve the current pressure and maintain power. President Trump's reluctance to engage in military campaigns is admirable. However, his obsession with winning the Nobel Peace Prize is widely ridiculed. Nevertheless, we'd rather have a US administration that refrains from using military power than one that likes to wage wars. This might be a little bit of a problem with Iran. I'll explain why. Let's first pay attention to the fact that, as we have seen with Russia's war of conquest in Ukraine, it is difficult to persuade the political leadership of a military strong nation to stop a war it has started without achieving a decisive victory. Ending a war requires political leaders to admit they made a mistake. That is not something that politicians like doing, however. It is worth mentioning that the war started by the United States, any war started by the United States, can eventually be stopped by electing a new administration, which would result in change in policy. In other words, US wars end when voters turn against the incumbent president who started them. This is what we call a democracy. It is a state of political pluralism that allows active members of society to influence the political force through public pressure or an electoral process. Nothing like this would ever happen in present-day Iran. A deal with United States would fuel Tehran's propaganda and strengthen the clerical regime's position. Tehran is betting on a deal with Trump because it would buy the Iranian regime time. The Ayatollahs hope that American society will eventually tip the scales of power in Washington. The Islamic regime reasonably expects that any future US administration will ease the pressure on Iran. This is the Tehran's best-case scenario. Their top priority is maintaining their power. In few years, they hope to rebuild their proxies and regain their status of a regional power. Tehran's theocracy can wait for a change of heart among the American voters. For this reason, a fair deal with the Iranian regime is virtually impossible. The Ayatollahs remain in power. If they remain in power, they will break the promises sooner rather than later. The Tehran regime knows very well that nuclear weapons will solidify Iranian theocracy the same way as they did for the North Korea. In few years, President Trump may become a lame duck like any other US president in the final year of his term. A deal with Iran would pose a significant risk to the United States and further damage its reputation as a reliable partner. Currently, the US is losing many of its geopolitical partners, particularly the Europeans. If Washington eases the pressure on the Ayatollahs and allow them to remain in power, America's enemies will benefit greatly. A deal with Iran would also likely be a huge blow to Israel. Anyone in Iran or the Middle East who had hoped that Washington would help the Iranian people change their government would also see the deal as a betrayal and feel abandoned. Finally, a deal between United States and Iran that preserves the theocratic republic would mean that the current US administration tolerates some worse forms of government on the planet. During the previous Trump administration, the United States established a relationship with North Korea. The second Trump administration, aligned with Russia's goals in Ukraine, thus legitimizing the Kremlin's geopolitical ambitions. A deal with Iran would restore the status quo in the Middle East, returning it to the way it was before the political changes in Syria and the Israeli wars on Hezbollah and Hamas. The only beneficiary of such a status quo, of such a situation, would be the authoritarian clerical regime in Tehran.